awards before our keynote, but we want to make sure that we give our keynote speaker as much time as possible. What I would ask is that you do stick around after for four relatively quick awards presentations to honor and recognize and acknowledge those folks and those teams' accomplishments. So please do stick around, stay after our keynote speaker, if you would. Let me just say thank you to all of you so much for being here. This is record attendance for the Goddard Symposium, so we're very happy about that. Yep. And what a way to kick off the 70th anniversary of the Astronautical Society. We're just so enthused by your engagement and your participation here. It's very humbling, and we are very appreciative. And stick with us as we continue through the year. You know, we're talking about science here. This summer at our Glenn Symposium, we'll be talking about space technology. That's out in Cleveland. And then this fall, we'll be down in Huntsville talking about space exploration. So join us for those. Just a quick set of thank yous, just while I have everybody's attention, and some recognitions. So again, thank you to everybody on the Goddard team for helping make this happen. Some special folks to recognize. So Jay and Britt back there, running all of our AV and moving stuff in and out of the theater and all that. And of course, Todd from the University of Maryland also doing that. So thank you very much to Todd. And I just want to say that Jay and Britt, their team, I think this is their 19th year of doing this for us for free. So thank you very, very much to both of you. Thank you to my staff, Leanna and Marta. They've been running around. Leanna's been taking pictures. Marta's working registration. So thank you to them. And I also want to recognize one set of students who are here, the team from the University of Illinois out there. From what I understand, this is their 20th year of coming to this event as a group. So they all assemble in a couple of vehicles and make their way out here each year. And so we're very happy to have them. And just one more recognition for Bob Kowalczyk, our volunteer who's been doing this for 15 years and got an award yesterday. So congratulations. And finally, thank you to Jim Garvin for introducing flatulence into a space symposium conversation. So we appreciate that. It's the only place where you can have Shakespeare and flatulence in the same panel. So yeah, there you go. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Michelle Thaler from Goddard and our planning committee chair to introduce our keynote speaker. Michelle, thank you.
Well, first of all, I just have to say thank you so much for attending. The record attendance is wonderful. I want to thank the director of Goddard, Dr. Mackenzie Lystrup, for being so supportive of this and really encouraging people to come in. And just personally, thank you for the time. Okay, I know how hard it is to take 3 days, at least 3 half days, out of your schedule. Thank you for that. A chance to kind of sort of stand back a little bit, look at where we've come, look at the exciting things that are going on in science and technology. So, for me, to all of you, thank you for coming. So I have the honor of introducing Dante Lauretta, somebody that I think most of you know of. And I've got sort of the official bio, and then we'll go into some other things too. But so Dr. Dante Lauretta is the Regents Professor of Planetary Science and Cosmochemistry in the Lunar and Planetary Laboratory and the Department of Planetary Sciences at the University of Arizona. Since 2011, he has served as the principal investigator for NASA's OSIRIS-REx asteroid sample return mission, which we heard a lot about today. In addition, he is a co-investigator on Japan's Hayabusa 2 asteroid sample return mission, the European Space Agency's Hera planetary defense mission, and the director of the Arizona Astrobiology Center. I hope a lot of you have had a chance. Today was all about astrobiology. And I think if I had to choose like one subject that just excites me, even the term astrobiology, just it is amazing. Dr. Lauretta is a distinguished academic researcher and has published over 200 manuscripts in peer-reviewed journals and co-edited several academic books. His research has been featured on the covers of Science, Nature, Nature Astronomy, Nature Geoscience, and also Sky and Telescope. He's won numerous awards for his work, including the Silver Achievement Medal from NASA, and holds 2 Guinness World Records. I don't know which ones, so you'll have to tell us about that. And also, asteroid 5819 is named Lauretta in recognition of his scientific contributions. So we mentioned all of the books that he's involved in the articles. I actually happen to have a special bookmark that he just gave me for his new book that's coming out in March 2024.
Came out this week.
I was about to say, so March 2024. That's what it says on back. So yeah, right. So this is March 24th still. You're already like way ahead. But The Asteroid Hunter by Dante Lauretta. So I think all of us are going to want to get that book. That sounds really, really exciting. I've known Dante kind of peripherally covering OSIRIS-REx. And aside by being very impressed by his sartorial sense, he always has the best suits. But he's really somebody that has brought a sense of fun. I was saying today that I think he's a rock star. He's a different kind of rock. But you all know probably that Brian May is actually on his science team, right? So we've got both rock stars and rock stars. But anyway, the sense of fun, but also the sense of inclusion. When I look at the teams that Dante puts together, I'm consistently impressed by the diversity and the inclusion of young careers, early career scientists, mostly young people, and how they're just right in there in the most important parts of the mission. So I really want to thank you as well for all that you've done for that. So without further ado, and be sure to get a bookmark if you can from Dante, Dr. Dante Lauretta.
Thank you for that great introduction. So for the world records, I believe the first one is actually held by the OSIRIS-REx spacecraft for the closest in orbit around a natural body. And the second one, I think, belongs to asteroid Bennu for the smallest object ever orbited by a spacecraft. But I keep them on my CV just because it's pretty cool. And we do have the certificates from the Guinness Foundation. So yeah, great panel today. I really enjoyed seeing Pete and Rich and Danny represent the team. Fantastic job as always. I'm going to dive a little bit more into the astrobiological implications. I thought this was an appropriate topic coming to the Goddard Symposium because this is the heart of our astrobiology science team right here at the center. With Danny, Jason, and the amazing, I see Jamie here too, all the amazing astrobiologists that are digging into these samples and revealing some of the results I'm going to show you today, of course, with contributions from our team from all over the world. So just to get us all on the same page, this is our timeline for the mission. And I love the way it's illustrated because one of the cool things we did is every year we put out a commemorative poster, had an accompanying pin. So if you're a pin collector, my last count, I think there's 22 different OSIRIS-REx pins out there, patches and stickers that go along with all of that. This was a 7-year journey to a near-Earth asteroid, Bennu, and back. We launched in September of 2016, came back to the Earth 1 year later for a gravity assist to do an orbital inclination plane change and set up the rendezvous with the target. Arrived in late 2018, spent all of 2019 mapping and agonizing over the location where we're going to collect the sample because of the really unexpected roughness of the surface, announcing the selection at site at AGU at the end of 2019. Then COVID hit, but we persisted and persevered because that's what this team does, support each other, came together. And amazingly, I think as Rich says, in the darkest days of the pandemic, we sent the spacecraft down to collect the sample from the surface of the asteroid in October. Left in May of 2021, and as we saw, to successfully deliver that sample back to the Earth. So here's just to orient everybody on what our target looks like. It's about 500 meters in diameter to give you a sense of scale. We like to compare it to the Empire State Building. And it's a spinning pile of rubble. It really is a very different kind of body than we had imagined. I've been on this program over 20 years since we first started formulating and writing proposals to the agency. And we thought of asteroids as rocks in space, like solid chunks of matter that would be fragments of larger bodies or bodies that evolved from the early protoplanetary disk. Because of the spherical shape, you can tell right away it's got fluid-like properties, and it's got this bulge at the equator because centrifugal forces are pushing material to migrate there. So material from the North Pole, material from the South Pole are all moving down, and we have lots of evidence of mass movement on this asteroid. It's actually a very dynamic world, and the surface appears to be pretty young. Just by counting the craters, it looks like the surface exposure is about 50 to 60 million years. And the material that we're finding in there formed 4.5 billion years ago. So it's mechanically processed, but a lot of the isotopic systematics have not been reset. You can see its orbit over there on the far side of the slide. It's an Apollo-type near-Earth object, so its orbit crosses that of the Earth. You can see, especially when you look at the lower kind of oblique view of the orbit diagrams, that in fact does cross right through the orbit of the Earth. That was a key factor in selecting it as a target for the mission, because having a very Earth-like orbit means the delta B is relatively low, and it's very accessible. You can launch, you can rendezvous, and you can return. In this case, all with a monopropellant system, which is, we were trying to really make the architecture as simple as possible. And when we were originally conceiving of this back in 2005, solar electric was still quite experimental. So we arrived at this target. That's right, down is forward on this one. And we spent an enormous amount of activity trying to figure out where we were going to go collect the sample, because the guidance system and that we had launched with was targeting areas about 50 meters in diameter. And you can see the 10-meter scale bar down there at the lower end. So this is the area that we ended up selecting, but you can see what the average surface of the asteroid looks like when you look around the perimeter of the crater there. That's a 20-meter diameter impact crater. Probably one of the youngest features on the surface. It looks very fresh. And everything around it are 10-meter scale boulders. So clearly the 50-meter accuracy was not going to cut it, because there's lots of spacecraft killing objects in that region. So we had to adapt on the fly, go to a backup navigation system called natural feature tracking. I think one of the other things I'm most proud of on this mission is the extensive engineering publication record that has come out of it. When you look at Corley and Pete and Kenny and all of the team members, there's an enormous body of literature about flight dynamics, navigation, natural feature tracking, orbit determination, all of the cutting edge things. Those two world records kind of encapsulate that, but they don't capture the enormity of the effort and the advancement in human knowledge. I always love to compliment the flight dynamics team. They are the true heroes of the mission, because they pulled off miracles. So that natural feature tracking, you know, we were counting on that working as we were going through the site selection process. We kept drawing these circles in these little craters and like, yeah, you can get into a 5-meter spot, right? That doesn't sound that hard. That's only a order of magnitude improvement over the requirement that we designed the spacecraft to. No problem. I'm sure you got that margin in your pocket somewhere. Sure enough, they perfected the natural feature tracking system. It was a great collaboration between the science team and the engineering teams, because the scientists had to build those features. These are 3-dimensional topographic models with photometric functions on top of them, so that the spacecraft could render predict images, compare those to the onboard cameras images, and then update its ephemeris, figure out if it that was holding the tag SAM, which is that circular device you see in the middle of the capsule there. That was the thing that actually touched the asteroid. That's where the screws were stuck and we couldn't get inside right away. But the dust that was all around the outer perimeter, you can see it actually kind of conforms to the shape of the canister lid and also the braided metal seal. There's the outer larger particles there and then the fine grained material inside. Even though those screws were stuck, we were still able to get inside tag SAM. I call it, everything came out through the indoor. There was a mylar flap, which got stuck open right after sampling and caused us to lose material. But we just worked that backwards and say, oh, using forceps and scoops, we can get in there. And by October, we had pulled out over 70 grams of material. And our requirement was 60. So I wasn't panicking at that point. I was like, we already have more material than our mission requirement. And our science plan is built around the requirement. So I don't want you stressing about the stuck screws. Actually take some time, enjoy the holiday, think about a better screwdriver. NASA's pretty good about that kind of stuff, right? And come back in January and crack that thing open. And that's exactly what happened. And we got the full 121.6 grams. Although I just heard today about another gram was swept off that canister lid. So I think we might be getting closer to 122.5 grams. So there's still hidden dust in that hardware that we need to get through and get all that stuff out. There'll be maybe a little bit more coming out as we go. So that was the first set of trays that we filled up in October. And then we got the tag SAM open in January. This is the second set of 8 trays. So the samples distributed across what we call these 12 pizza trays, which was designed so we could just pour off of that circular tag SAM with a baffle on top. And then these trays go into protective cabinets and we work with one at a time as we're assessing material for distribution to the science team. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what we're going to do with all of this. I love this chart here. Cell at the top. If you take a look, 70% of that organism is water, H2O. I was like, well, okay, we'll check if there's water coming from the asteroid. 30% is what we call dry solids, all the stuff that's left after you dehydrate a bacterium. 90% of that material is 4 elements: carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, and hydrogen. And then 10% we call inorganic. It's mostly phosphorus and sulfur, but you have a lot of ions: sodium, calcium, magnesium, potassium. Those are the things that go through ion channels. They're really important for all kinds of voltages and protein regulations in cells and for your neurons and all of that. Some iron, and then all these trace elements: zinc, magnesium, copper, transition metals that serve as catalysts. A lot of proteins just exist to hold these little ions in a very specific spot so they can catalyze a critical reaction for our biology. So as an elemental cosmochemist, I'm like, oh, this is going to be easy. I'm just going to grind the rock up, run it through a mass spectrometer, and tell you these elements are there. And I'll say, yeah, it delivered the origin, the building blocks of life. But we know that's not the case, right? You couldn't just take all these elements, throw them in a test tube, and come back the next morning and have a bacteria crawl out, right? Something else has to be going on for that to take place. So I'm just going to step through those major biogenic elements, the big 6, the CHOMPs, C-H-O-M-P-S, and where are we right now with our understanding of them in the asteroid sample. So let's take a look at hydrogen. Hydrogen is very abundant. We're talking about weight percents in the presentation here, so keep that in mind. Hydrogen is a very, very low mass atom, right? It's 1 proton for protium and a proton and a neutron for deuterium. So it's a lot more atomic percent than here, but the hydrogen contents between 0.85 and 1.05 weight percent. That means the water content is about 9 times that. So we're looking at about maybe 8 or 9% by weight of the sample is water. That's great. Not only is that interesting for origin of life, but for the habitability of planets, because we believe liquid water is essential for a habitable world. That might be biased by our understanding of terrestrial biology. For example, Titan might have some crazy ethane-based organisms, but it's not a bad place to start. I'm going to be comparing it to those CI chondrites. Those are the most volatile rich meteorites that we know about. You can see that we're actually a little bit below the CIs, which come in at 1.5 weight percent, but that's a lot of contamination. The primary mineral that carries these things are phyllosilicates, and you can see them over there in the electron microscope image. especially the phase called serpentine, which is so named because it has a wavy kind of snake-like crystal structure and forms fibers like asbestos, is a mineral very much related to serpentine. They're also really good hygroscopic minerals. So they grab water from the atmosphere. So these CI chondrites have been sucking up water from Earth's atmosphere for over 100 years now. So we think that the primordial water abundance in the CI chondrites is much lower. We also see smectites, including the subset called smectites. So these things are water-rich clays. They form in environments on Earth like mid-ocean ridges, where you have hot material coming from the mantle of the Earth interacting with seawater and driving a serpentinization process. And we think that might be something very similar to the kind of geologic environment that we're dealing with on Bennu's precursor asteroid. So when we look at what those serpentine rocks, they say, well, they form by alteration of ultramafic rocks. That is something from the mantle of the Earth dominated by anhydrous silicates like olivine pyroxene. But it also requires a carbonated fluids, CO2-rich fluids. So that's getting us to a couple other really key biogenic elements. And we're finding a large diversity of organic molecules. We're still sorting all of that out, but it looks like there's thousands of different kinds of molecules, organic molecules in the sample. A lot of work to go to figure out what they all are and how they all formed and how they're related to each other. But of course, hydrogen is integral to all of those. Okay, if we look at carbon, there's a lot going on with the carbon chemistry here. So first of all, it's loaded. 4.5, 4.7 weight% of the rock is carbon. That's just about the highest value we've ever measured. It is the highest value measured in the Carnegie Institute lab where they did the work. There's a few reports of maybe something higher, but they're maybe not so robust or from such a large sample. And we see that we've got carbonates. So those are those white minerals typically form in hydrothermal systems or as evaporites. So you have calcium ions in solution, you have carbonate, like your soda water in solution. And as that cools off or evaporates away, the calcium and the carbonate bond and they form those white minerals. We're seeing a lot of different kinds of carbonates, magnesium bearing, iron bearing, manganese bearing, a huge diversity of minerals. The manganese is particularly compelling because it's one of those elements that are used in catalytic reactions biologically, but it's also has a radioactive isotope early in the solar system, and we can date when those carbonates formed as soon as we start to get into some of the detailed isotope systematics. We see organic material, kind of what we call IOM, insoluble organic material. One of the things that's a little challenging when I talk to my Goddard colleagues is the torture they put the samples through. They boil it in waters and acids, and they extract all this stuff out. And it's great because they're brilliant at it, and they run it through their mass spectrometers, GCMS, LCMS, all kinds of instruments and techniques that have been developed here at Goddard. But the stuff that's left after that torture regime is insoluble organic material, and that makes up most of the organics. And we're seeing it as plates. We're seeing it aggregating minerals, kind of like a tar, sticking dust grains together. And the ones that I'm most excited about, I don't know if I can use the laser pointer here, is the one towards the middle bottom of the slide there, these nanoglobules. We've seen these before in meteorites, but they're little spheres. We're starting to get inside of those. Some of those are filled with liquid water. Some of those are empty. Some of those have minerals inside of them. We don't know what the walls are made out of. I've been pushing the team. How do we figure that out? It's kind of a challenging measurement. But when I'm thinking about origin of life, compartmentalization is one of the key steps. You need to set up a boundary that isolates a chemical system from the environment. That's one of the key definitions of life. That's all of us, right? We have our boundary, typically our skin. That defines us. And all we know about is that we're interacting with this external environment and we're getting input from our sensory organs and then building a model of what's going on out there and trying to predict what's going to happen in the future as best we can. So I'm not saying that this is an organism, but I'm saying it's a key step in origin of life to compartmentalize material, separate it from the environment, ideally set up some sort of catalytic system of chemistry that's going to persist into the future. So the nanoglobules for me are super exciting targets for additional astrobiological investigation. And then the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, this is one of the very first results. We took that quick look sample from the avionics deck. We just took a few small 100 micron size grains, pressed them onto a planchette, put them into an instrument at Johnson Space Center called the L2MS, the Laser Desorption Laser Ionization Mass Spectrometer. But the spectrum that I'm showing you here shows all kinds of high molecular weight polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. An aromatic hydrocarbon refers to a ring structure, the simplest of which is benzene, 6 carbons in a ring. But you can see we've got naphthalene and we've got pyrene and we've got up to 4 ring molecules here. This was not produced when we turned the laser on. This is just what happened when we loaded the sample after crushing into the vacuum of the instrument. Bennu is outgassing these organic molecules. So any fresh fracturing of the rocks on the surface would be releasing these molecules out into space. So they're very labile, just a little bit of exposure and they're coming off the sample. Of course, we went in with the lasers and did the desorption and ionization, and the spectra looked the same. So you're able to liberate more with a little extra energy, but this stuff is pristine. It clearly has not been significantly thermally altered, or you wouldn't have this outgassing immediately upon fracturing. Nitrogen. Nitrogen is there at about 0.25%. That's substantially similar to our CI chondrites and other meteorites like that Tagish Lake, although it's a little bit higher. And we're particularly interested in nitrogen for the amino acids. And that's what our Goddard colleagues are the world's experts in here. And I know they're working through. We've got some results from the avionics deck. We've got some results from the TAG-SAM interior. There's some mysteries there, so I'm not going to go into a lot of the details. I know they presented some of the work at the LPSC just last week. But it's got amino acids, that's for sure. We're confident that some, if not all, of those amino acids are definitely coming from Bennu. One of the things I asked the team to do, and they responded brilliantly, was go for all 20 amino acids that are used in biology, because we kind of steered away from those with our meteorites. Some were analytically challenging. Others we just thought, well, the contamination is going to be such a concern. There are other amino acids that are not used in biology, and that's what a lot of our cosmochemical analysis is focused on. So we developed an analytical protocol to get all 20 amino acids from rocks from our samples. And I'm super excited. We'll really be able to tell you what might have been coming from space and what might have had to been produced on Earth, either abiotically or after the origin of life through metabolic processes. But what we really like to do here is compare the isotope systems, because this is just kind of a little roadmap. How does Bennu compare to our known meteorite collection? So I've got 2 isotope ratios. The bottom one is the deuterium to hydrogen ratio, deuterium being heavy hydrogen, and the nitrogen 15 to nitrogen 14 ratio, nitrogen 14 being the most abundant isotope. And you can see Bennu plotting there as the orange circle. The CI chondrites are the black dot there. The CM chondrites, which are related, also aqueously altered hydrated materials. Bennu doesn't look like any of those. There's another interesting group of meteorites, the CR chondrites. Bennu doesn't look like those. It kind of looks like Tagish Lake. That's the TL. That's the famous meteorite that landed on the frozen Arctic lake and was collected very quickly. It is clearly a very fragile sample, but it's provided profound insights into organic chemistry in the early solar system. But it's not quite there. And our error bars, you can see these are big numbers, ratios varying from -500 up to 1,000. Bennu is distinct from everything. Even the Ryugu samples, which were brought back by the Hayabusa 2 mission, don't have the same isotopic composition. So we're kind of in the middle of all of it. So it's not like a shocking value. And if you mixed a little of this and a little of that, like some CI and some CR, you'd get to the Bennu value. But right now it looks like a distinct material in our collection. Okay, oxygen, major element, forms most of the minerals on the asteroid, especially the phyllosilicates, which is about 70 to 80% of the sample are those clays. But what I got really excited about were the magnetites. This is iron oxide. They just show up in, first of all, these beautiful crystal forms. And they look like they're filling veins, like they were clearly deposited by a fluid that grew into, if you like, geodes or mineral collecting. A lot of the best mineral specimens form by hydrothermal deposition into a crack or vein or void in the rock. And that's what the magnetite looks like. We're seeing multiple different forms. Some of them look etched, like they formed a beautiful crystal, and then maybe an acidic fluid came by later and started to dissolve pieces of it. From an astrobiological perspective, these platelets, which is kind of in the middle of the slide, a little bit off to the left there, stacked plates of magnetite, because that is a very efficient organic chemical catalyst. So the mineral itself is used in some biological organisms. For example, navigating bacteria use the magnetic field and produce these crystals. But for me, the excitement here is that now you've got a reactive surface. So a lot of organic molecules are energetically prohibited, but you put a catalyst like there in the system, and all of a sudden the reaction rate takes off, sometimes by orders of magnitude. So this could be a little organic factory, having water with these magnetites, catalyzing all kinds of organics. As we know, there's thousands of different kinds of molecules in the sample. So this might be one route to how they were produced. And then we get to sulfur. Sulfur is important in amino acids, particularly like this amino acid methionine. You can see the sulfur is the yellow molecule or the yellow atom there. These make the structural bridges of proteins, right? Proteins are long chains of these simple amino acids, sometimes hundreds or maybe 1,000 amino acids long, but their function is determined by how they fold up into their three-dimensional shapes. And it's the sulfur that forms the bridges that link up and give structure, strength to the protein structure. So it's critical to get sulfur-bearing amino acids into early life form if you want to have protein folding, which does catalyst, it does structure, it does ion channels, it does all kinds of important things. In the avionics deck sample, they have detected methionine. And that's really exciting. I really want them to come back and say, is this from the Earth or is this from Bennu? Because it's such an important amino acid for understanding potential origin of life. Most of the sulfur is in minerals, like you can see up here, this beautiful hexagonal platelet. If you look at the top, you can actually see growth steps. So you can see this thing was also growing in a relatively volume unconstrained system. And I love this mineral because I wrote my PhD thesis on it. So it's really cool to see, and we'll get to study it. It also serves as an organic catalyst. So you got the oxides and you got the sulfides. They're going to catalyze different kinds of reactions. So now you got a couple different sites where you might be able to produce these incredibly compelling organic molecules. Sorry for the Moharo reference. It's not this symposium. That was from the Sapporo Symposium where I saw him present the work. And then let's get to phosphorus. This one has a special place in my heart because my first astrobiology research grant was to study phosphorus and looking for the exogenous delivery of this element to the surface of the Earth. Phosphorus is the least abundant of all these elements, and that's why I kind of zeroed in on it. I thought if you could figure out how the least abundant element got into a biological system, that could give you some really important clues to the origin of life. And we had talked about those boulders that had the veins that looked like the carbonates. And so I saw this particle. This came to the University of Arizona in the first allocation. It's only about 1 millimeter across. So it's one of the smaller particles. We have over 5,000 particles of this size or so that we've counted. There's lots and lots of this material. And I saw this one really stuck out. Most of the sample looks like the black material towards the center of the grain right there. But this one had this white, crusty material sitting on its surface. And I was like, that's got to be the carbonate. That's what we've been looking for. Something that was clearly deposited from a hydrothermal fluid. And then we hit it with the Fourier transform infrared spectrometer, and it's got this whopping phosphate feature. I was like, oh, yeah. All right, we got phosphorus here. And it turns out it's not calcium phosphate, which is the most abundant form that you find in geological systems. It's a magnesium sodium hydrated phosphate that's soluble in water. And we've gone in with the transmission electron microscope. It's amorphous. It doesn't have a crystal structure. So it looks like it was deposited really quickly. And we've seen some other geologic environments where this might be showing up around the solar system that may be providing us some insight into what may have happened here. But we're looking at, I think, here's some close-up SEM shots of what this looks like. So you can see, especially this image over here on the right, that blocky, fractured material, which is only tens of microns thick, that's that white phosphate material. The first thing I think of as a mineralogist when I see that is that looks like desiccation, right? Think of mud cracks when they shrink and they fracture. This looks like a desiccated material. So it probably had a lot more water in it when it originally formed, and that water was driven off either when it was on the asteroid or possibly after we collected it. But given its nature and its occurrence, I'm thinking that it was on the asteroid itself. And you can see it's just this thin crust that's coating the material. And I know that it's sitting on top of the more abundant kind of sample because I see that little hexagon all the way over there on the left. That's my favorite little sulfide mineral. So once you start to see those, up here you see the little spheres. Those are the magnetites, and the gray material are those clays. So that's what most of the Bennu sample looks like, but a few rare grains have this bright white phosphate crust on it. And so the biggest stone here is 3.5 centimeters. And when I stretch it, you can see I played in Photoshop with the hue and saturation. It gets blue, and then it looks like a heart. So I said, well, you know, Pluto has a heart, so Bennu has to have one too, right? So this is, I call the heart of Bennu. And I know my colleagues aren't happy because we weren't supposed to give samples cute names, but how can you not, right? And then more recently, I don't have it on the slide, but we've been doing 3D shape models, and we actually found one other piece that looks like this, and it broke off. It puzzle pieces really nicely into the bottom left corner there. So sadly, Bennu has a broken heart. Yeah. And so that color stretch lets me find this material all over the place. So once you know you can do that little Photoshop trick, you can see actually this phosphate is popping up. That's the broken heart piece of Bennu up there in the upper left, by the way. We don't know what the red phase is yet. It's not showing up in the little particle I have in Tucson, but that piece up there we're requesting for the science team, and hopefully will be in our lab soon. So what does the phosphate mean? Well, one environment, I gave this first result at the American Geophysical Union in December, and I said to the audience, you know, we don't see this in meteorites. This is not a phase that we've ever seen before. So first off, we brought stuff back we've never seen in our meteorite collection. To me, that's a huge win. And I said, has anybody seen this? Because I can't find geological occurrences of it. And a colleague came up and he said, yeah, we just detected this with the Cassini mass spectrometer data, which I think was built here at Goddard, right? And it's coming out of the plumes of Enceladus. And I was like, oh yeah. And that's why there's been all these ocean world headlines and stuff, because that's why I say, well, maybe we've got a Bennu was coming from something like Enceladus, probably a little smaller. And what's exciting is in order to produce the high phosphate concentration in the solution, you have to have that carbonated fluid. It's got to be completely saturated in carbon dioxide. And then what happens is the first mineral that will precipitate will be the calcium carbonate. And it'll steal all the calcium out of the system, and phosphate will have nothing that it really likes to bond with. So its concentration will go up and up and up in the solution until either it evaporates or it reaches a saturation point. And then it just grabs whatever ions are in the liquid, and sodium would be one of those, and magnesium is very abundant there. And the chart over here is from the paper by Postberg et al., where they reported the phosphates from Enceladus. And that top graph shows you the kinds of conditions that you need. And what I really like is they're showing you where in the solar system this would have accreted. In order to get something with those high phosphate concentrations, it had to accrete in the outer solar system, which is one of our hypotheses for where Bennu originated, out beyond what we call the CO2 frost line. So you have the water line, and then you get farther out and CO2 ice becomes stable. Bennu's precursors may have accreted that really carbonated rich material in the outer solar system. The pH is a function of that, and we do expect basic solutions. We've modeled that with our carbonaceous chondrites for decades. pHs of 9, 10, 11 are pretty consistent with the nature of the fluid we expect that altered these samples. It's also consistent with what we see at the hydrothermal systems where these things are being produced. And then we are finding some phosphides. So we do have some disequilibrium here. Phosphides are metallic versions of phosphorus. And I mentioned my first entree into astrobiology all the way back in the early 2000s was to study phosphorus. And we were looking at this iron phosphide mineral, when it reacted with water. And we found that, boy, it reacted like gangbusters. You couldn't have asked for a simpler experiment. We took a chunk of schreibersite, that iron phosphide from an iron meteorite, had pure deionized water, and dropped it in there, and this reaction sequence started, and we're making triphosphates and diphosphates, all kinds of fascinating stuff. This was work I did with my graduate student, Matt Pasek, and he still pursues a lot of implications from this as his major career focus. So that's also super exciting. So we have, first of all, I think Danny said this, astrobiologist's dream come true. We have amazing samples. We have amazing team members, many of them right here in Greenbelt, Maryland. So there's lots of exciting implications here. We're looking at serpentinites. These serpentinites form at mid-ocean alkaline hydrothermal vents. We're seeing that we have solutions that are really enriched in magnesium sodium phosphates, like are coming out of the plumes of Enceladus. There's also soda lakes in British Columbia. There was just a paper in Nature Communications about this a month ago or so. And the same chemistry, carbonate versus phosphate chemistry is at play here. So we're looking at understanding that carbonate phosphate system, and could it have been a small moon or maybe a small planetesimal that accreted an enormous amount of ice in the outer solar system? We still have work to do to understand that. So that's why I say at the end, could Bennu represent fragments of an ancient ocean world? This is kind of a new hypothesis I put in the sample analysis plan, challenging the team to prove me wrong. So thank you for your attention, and thank you for joining me tonight.
He has agreed to make some time for any questions, just a couple, if there's any. Anybody have any questions?
Over here?
Oh, way back over there. Just stand up and shout it, and we'll try to repeat it for our online audience.
Sure. We absolutely, so the question was, what kind of planetary protection protocols do we have to implement on OSIRIS-REx? We absolutely had to go through NASA's planetary protection review to get approval. We were unrestricted Earth return because we felt like Bennu is such a small body and crosses the Earth. Probably material has already been delivered to the Earth from Bennu based on that orbit and the fact that it's an active asteroid and ejects particles into space. We didn't know that when we went through the planetary protection review, but in hindsight, it looks like a good call. Also, it's an ancient surface that's been sterilized by exposure to cosmic radiation. So we were unrestricted Earth return, but we had very strict requirements on keeping the sample isolated from the terrestrial environment for the science, right? The science drove it a lot more than planetary protection did.
Unless there's anything else.
One more. Let's do one more. Yeah.
What are the chances Bennu was from Earth-related impacts and such?
The chance that Bennu's from an Earth-related impact, you mean like a fragment of the Earth? 0.0001 maybe? I think that's a really, really low probability event. Yeah. So it just doesn't look like Earth rocks isotopically. It's completely distinct from the Earth. That's one of the key parameters that we use to classify. I showed you carbon, nitrogen. We also have oxygen isotopes. It doesn't look like the Earth at all. So yeah, this is something that, and the ages are coming in at 4.5 billion years. So clearly from even before we think the Earth formed, we're getting geochronology data that would suggest it's pre-Earth formation of this asteroidal building material. Thank you. And thank you again for your attention.
Yep. Well, I'm no elemental cosmochemist, but I think that was an amazing talk. So thank you so much.